here in this corner, we'll call this the thick pizza corner, is 42% of you, like thick crust pizza, right? And over in this corner, that means 58% of you prefer thin crust pizza. If you're in this corner, you're in the right corner. Because that's the crust I enjoy. My family used to be split on this, like in the corners, right? And so when we would order pizza, we had to order half thick crust, half thin crust, and I've converted them. And so now, I don't think I converted them. I think they just got tired of arguing with me. And so now we just order thin crust. But isn't that how we do with everything these days, right? And 42, 58, it's like we're almost split down the middle on everything. You take any issue in our culture, in our society today, and it's all about putting on the boxing gloves and fighting with someone who thinks or believes differently than we do. Am I right? Right? About anything, okay? So like in this corner, we'll call this a political corner, right? So in this corner, there's some of you that lean more left. And in this corner, there's some of you that lean more right when it comes to politics and when it comes to voting. We're in the middle of a crisis, all kinds of crises in our society right now. And so racial tension is one of the crises that we're in. And so like in this corner are the people who feel like to take a stand against racial injustice, we should kneel when the national anthem is played. And in this corner, there are some that say, no, that's the national anthem of our nation. We should never kneel when it's being played, even if we're trying to take a stand by kneeling for racial injustice, right? We're in the middle of this pandemic. And so, like in this corner, we've got people who are like, man, we should be doing all school virtually. Schools should not be back open. We should not do in-person learning face-to-face. And in this corner, we've like, no, our kids need to get back to something normal. They need to get back to school. And we'll fight and we'll fuss and we'll argue all day long. I had a thought this week, and I didn't mention this last week. Churches are really good about this. You ever been to a church meeting? I was in church meetings all day yesterday, not necessarily Aldersgate church meetings, just the context that our church is part of. And for the most part, it was a good day. But there was this one time in the meeting yesterday where we fought for 20 minutes over whether churches should use styrofoam cups or not. Because in this corner, we've got those that lean very environmentally, and God created the earth, and we should take good care of the earth. And because styrofoam cups are not good for the environment, we should get rid of styrofoam cups. And in this corner, it's not that the corner was necessarily saying, hey, we disagree that God created the earth and we should take good care of it. It's just like this corner was saying, is this really something we need to be arguing about right now with everything else going on in our world? I was sitting there going, is there any church that's even allowed to use any kind of cup these days? That's how we do it. It doesn't matter what the issue is. We take any issue. It's this corner versus that corner, and we give this jab and we give that jab, and the only reason we do it is to prove that we're right and to win the debate and win the argument. And the point of this entire message series is that Jesus shows us a different way. You know, Jesus, he predicted his own death and resurrection, and he pulled it off. And what I say is anybody who can do that, I'm going to listen to that guy. I'm going to pay attention to that guy. And I think Jesus shows us a whole different way. Jesus shows us a way to move out of the boxing room and to pull up a chair. To take off the boxing gloves and to sit down across from someone who is in a different corner than us and be kind and have a conversation where we're present and we're real with one another and where we can share truth boldly in a kind, significant, meaningful way. And so we're looking at a story throughout this series. It comes out of John chapter 4. So if you got a Bible or your phone, I would encourage you to go to John chapter 4, and I'm going to read part of the story for us. We started it last week. We're going to be in this story for 4 weeks, and so I'd encourage you to study it at home. This morning we're going to read through about verse 15 or so. okay? So I'm going to read out of the English Standard Version. I'm not going to read all the verses, but you can follow along with me. I'm going to start in verse 3. And it says, he, that's Jesus, all right, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee, and he had to, underline that, and he had to pass through Samaria. And he gets to this village in Samaria, if you keep reading, and he comes to a well. He's tired because he's been on this long journey. It was about a 2.5-day journey and all the way to Galilee, and he's hungry. And so he sits down at the well. His disciples go into the village to buy food. Pick up at verse 7 with me. A woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to me, give me a drink. You see, he invited her into a conversation. And he had no reason to do that because in this culture, men, not just Jewish men, but men in general, did not speak to women in public. And women were not supposed to speak to anyone in public. That was the culture of the day. And not only that, she is a Samaritan woman. And if there was anybody that was ever in a boxing ring, it was the Jews and the Samaritans in this culture. The Jews, they believed different religion. I mean, they didn't look at the entire Old Testament the way the Jews did. And they worshiped at a different place than the Jews did. Every Jew knew Jerusalem was the place to worship, but Samaritans did not believe that. And they believed that the races were different because the Samaritans were not, how would we say it today? They were not purely, they were interracial. And so in this culture, that was not an accepted thing. That was taboo. And so there was all of these reasons for Jesus not to engage in conversation with the woman, not to pull up a chair, but instead what he did is he said, give me a drink. Skip down to verse 9. The Samaritan woman said to him, let's just eavesdrop on this conversation that the woman and Jesus have. The Samaritan woman said to him, how is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. And the woman said to him, sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us this well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock. And Jesus said to her, everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. The woman said to him, sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water. I just want you to focus in on the conversation that Jesus initiates with this woman and that the woman responds to him in. And we're going to look at the rest of this conversation in the next couple of weeks, but I want to stop here today with this conversation, and I want us to pick up on 3 different things that Jesus does in the conversation. But first, I think it's important for us to realize that thing I had you underline. It says Jesus had to go through Samaria. Okay, let me just clue you in. Jesus did not have to go through Samaria. Okay? That's like me saying, so Amy and I, we live in the burbs of Lubbock, right? We live in Wolforth, okay? And so I don't know if y'all have noticed this in Lubbock, if you're watching online, wherever you're from. So like there's these new stores, this new chain of stores we have in Lubbock. It's called Brahms. And I'm kind of if you're in Lubbock, this is new. Like if you're in the panhandle of Texas or North Texas, Oklahoma, I mean, if you're in Oklahoma, at least you have Brahms, right? And Brahms are these incredible burger restaurants, but even more than that, they have this incredible line of ice cream and milkshakes and all. So Brahms built a store literally blocks from our house. In fact, it's the largest store in their entire chain to date. And if I'm going home and I stop at that Brahms and get ice cream and walk in the door with ice cream, Amy will look at me because we're trying to eat more healthy now. And I'll say, I had to go by Brahms. It's blocks from our house. But the truth is, I can get to our house without going by Brahms. Don't want to, but I can. Jesus did not have to go through Samaria. In fact, most Jews would not go through Samaria. They would go a longer route to the west around the coast, or they would go across the Jordan River to the east and up that direction. It would take longer than going through Samaria, but they would do it because they hated the Samaritans that much. They disagreed with the Samaritans that much. And here it's so important that John highlights that Jesus had to go through Samaria. Why? Because Jesus had a divine agenda. Now, we see that Jesus is fully human in this story because he's tired when he gets to the well. And he wants to sit and rest. He's hungry and he sends the disciples ahead to get food. But he was also fully God. And he knew that he had a divine agenda, a divine appointment waiting for him in Samaria. That appointment that would speak to us even today. And let me ask you a question. What is it that keeps you from pulling up a chair with people who think, believe, and act differently than you do? One word. Whatever you're thinking, it can probably be wrapped up into one word. Agenda. Like sometimes it's our calendar agenda. Like, man, we're so busy. We've got so many places to go and we're always running behind and we're rushing to get there. Now, we got time to stop at Brahms and get ice cream. But most of the time, we are so in a hurry. We're rushing everywhere. And our calendar keeps us from stopping and having the conversations that we need to be having. Sometimes it's a political agenda. We don't want someone else's perspective because we think our perspective is the only one that's correct. Sometimes it's a personal agenda. We could go on and on and on. The bottom line is the thing that keeps us from pulling up a chair most of the time is our own agenda. And the three things I want to show you from John chapter 4 is how Jesus surrendered that agenda and gave in to a divine agenda. The first one I want us to notice is this. Jesus looked the woman in the eyes. Right? I mean, think about that. Jesus is sitting at the well. This woman comes out to draw water from the well, and Jesus says, "Give me a drink." Now, do you think Jesus said, "Give me a drink"? I don't. I think Jesus looked up, looked her in the eyes, and said, "Give me a drink." Now, from the story and all the context clues in the stories, we understand that this woman was not coming at the popular time when all the other women came out to the well to get water. So there was already something going on in her life where she felt incredible shame and disgrace. And then she gets to the well, and to her surprise, here sits this Jewish man, not just a Jewish man, but a Jewish rabbi, although she probably doesn't know that at the time. And he takes the time not only to speak to her, but to look her in the eye. I'm telling you, we've lost that in our culture. Right? I think the reason we jump in the boxing ring on social media all the time is because we feel like we can say whatever we want to say because we don't have to look them in the eye. We don't have to look someone in the eye, and so we feel like we can just say whatever we want to say because we're not looking them in the eye. I'm convicted of this. I am not perfect in any of this by any means. I am preaching more to myself than I'm preaching to anyone else. The other day, I'm walking into Market Street right over here on 98th Street because I had to take care of some church business, and as I'm walking into the store, my phone rings. It's somebody that I've been playing phone tag with for a very long time, and so I was like, man, I'm going to take this call, and I take this call, and it's lasting longer than I think it should last. I've gotten everything in the store I need to get. I go to check out, and I never even bother to get off the phone and look the checker in the eye. How do you think that makes her feel? We don't take the time to look people in the eye. And we need to sit across the table from someone who would stand in an opposite corner of us and look them in the eye. Jesus did that not only here. I could tell you countless stories. Remember the story of Zacchaeus? Luke chapter 19, Zacchaeus was a wee little man. So Jesus was passing through his village. He climbed up in a tree so he could see him. Jesus gets to the tree, stops, and looks up, Scripture tells us. Looks up to see Zacchaeus in the eye. and has a conversation with Zacchaeus. There's a story in in Mark chapter 5, and we call this story the miracle on the way to a miracle. And so Jesus was on his way to heal an important person's child. It was a Roman official, and on the way, there's these crowds just pressing in on Jesus, and all of a sudden Jesus stops and says, "Who touched me?" And the disciples are like, "Jesus, there's people everywhere. How in the world could you know that someone touched you?" "No, someone touched me. I felt the power drain out of me," Jesus says. And it was a woman in the crowd who had been this problem. She had been bleeding for years. And Jesus took the time, get that, he stopped his agenda to look her in the eyes and give her healing. There's a story about the parable of the Good Samaritan. It's not an actual story that Jesus encountered. It's a story that he tells us, a parable he gives us. You know the story probably, where this person's injured on the road, and one person passes by and doesn't stop, and then another person passes by and doesn't stop, and finally the third person, the Samaritan, stops by and renders aid. It was a Samaritan that took time to look the injured person in the eye. There's a study that happened at Princeton not too long ago with seminarians, those that are studying the Bible. And they did this thing where they brought seminarians into a room and they gave them an assignment. And they said, "All right, you're going to go to this building and you're going to talk on this topic extemporaneously." And then they staged this scene on the way from the building they were in to the building where they were going to go. They staged a Good Samaritan scene, and there was this person laying out there in the middle of the campus, her obviously hurting, obviously wounded, moaning in pain, and none of the seminarians stopped and rendered aid. And here's the interesting thing. A lot of the seminarians, the story they had been given to present when they got to the other building was the story of the Good Samaritan. Because their agenda told them they had to be somewhere else and had to be there at a certain time at a certain place. We need to get over our agenda and take the time to look people in the eye. Here's another thing that Jesus did in the story. That's why I want you to eavesdrop on the conversation. Jesus listened to the woman. See, he saw and he heard, right? James chapter 1, verse 19. Let every person be quick to hear and slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Yeah, I think that most of the time, even when we're willing to pull up a chair, we pull up a chair so that we can tell the other person what we want to tell them, what we want them to know, and we don't take time to sit and listen. Right? I think there are lots of different reasons for that. I think sometimes it's because when they're talking, we're already formulating in our head our next argument to whatever it is they're saying. I think sometimes it's because we're trying to persuade or lecture or preach at them. I think sometimes it's because we're judging or we're criticizing or we're blaming, or sometimes we're shaming or ridiculing or name-calling, or sometimes it's because we're trying to fix the problem. I've been married over 25 years. It's taken me this long to just figure out that sometimes Amy doesn't want me to fix anything. She just wants me to listen. Such a waste of time. Listen, people don't really care how much we know until they know how much we care. And they know how much we care by how much we're willing to sit and sacrifice our agenda and listen to them, to see their perspective. I'll show it to you this way. I hope you can see this. I don't know how many of you can see this. This is a bottle of water. How many of you can see what's on the bottle of water? Can anybody see what's written there on the, or what do you see on this side of the bottle of water? Anybody? On this side, Shar, can you see this? If I get real close to you. What's written on that side of the bottle? Ozarka. That's the brand of water. I'll give this illustration credit to Robert Morris, by the way. If you could see this bottle of water, what's written on the front side is Ozarka. I'm not on that side, and I can tell you on this side of the bottle of water, Ozarka is nowhere. Standing on this side of the bottle of water, I cannot see Ozarka like you can see Ozarka. And you see, here's what listening does. It helps us walk around to the other side of the bottle and see someone else's perspective. And we will never step out of the boxing ring. We will never find unity if we're not willing to walk around to the other side of the bottle and see someone else's perspective. Notice I did not say you have to walk around to the other side of the bottle and agree with their perspective. But we have to walk around to the other side of the bottle and see their perspective. That's exactly what Jesus did by giving the woman his eyes and his ears, and here's the third thing he did. He was moved with compassion. It's his eyes, it's his ears, and then it's his hands and his feet. We're going to see that in the rest of the story in the next weeks. I would encourage you to study it this week. But every time, in fact, over 40 times in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we see that Jesus saw. And every time Jesus saw, he was moved with compassion. In other words, it means he was moved to put himself into their place. We'll see, even in the story in John chapter 4, he didn't agree with everything the woman said, but he had empathy for her. He put himself into her place. There's a big difference between sympathy and empathy, by the way. Sympathy is if you're standing at the side of the pool and you see someone struggling and they're going under the water, that you just call for help and throw them a lifeline. That's sympathy. Empathy means you jump in the pool with them. When we see and hear the way Jesus saw and heard, we can't help but be moved with compassion. In fact, Jesus said, what's the most important commandment? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. That word love is the word agape. See, in the Greek language, there's lots of different words for love. In the English language, we have one word. So I love thin crust pizza and I love Amy. Those better be two different kinds of love. In the Greek word, there are different words to express different kinds of love. The word agape is one of those words, and the word agape means to show tangible acts of love, to show empathy, and that's what Jesus did. So, here's my challenge to you this week. Last week, I asked you to ask 3 different people what's it like to be on the other side of you. I hope you did that. This week, here's what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to pull up a chair with at least one person who thinks differently than you do, acts differently than you do. I love this in verse 27 of John chapter 4. After this dialogue with the woman, it says, just then his disciples came back. They marveled that he was talking with a woman, but no one said, out loud, none of the disciples said, what do you seek? Or, why are you talking with her? In our culture, if we find ourselves in this corner and we began to pull up a chair with someone in this corner, the culture yells at us, why are you having a conversation with them? Jesus turned the world upside down because he was willing to sit down and have a conversation with people different from him. And I implore you this week to sit down, pull up a chair, and have a conversation with someone different than you. God, I ask right now that those of us sitting in this room and those of us watching online, that you would put on our minds, that you would put on our hearts, that one person, at least one person, that you want us to invite into a conversation with us this week, that we would be willing to pull up a chair. God, that one person that thinks differently than we do, lives differently than we do. And we would look them in the eye and listen to them. And that in listening and looking, you would help us be moved with love, even if we don't agree. God, help us to pull up a chair.